for him and have a statue dedicated to him because of he was a war hero, and that's actually one of the reasons why he was able to get close to Hitler. And so but still, I felt like there was just too much credit given to Stauffenberg that should have been spread around amongst many other people involved in the plot. And that's really like the only real critique I have the film. That and Stauffenberg was a blonde. He was blonde, blue-eyed. You know, he looked that image of what Hitler and the Nazis' ideal of what a German, an Aryan, should look like, and not Tom Cruise. So, you know, you might say that's nitpicking, but when you consider the importance that the Nazis placed on that, and that was something that I believe it's recorded that when Hitler first met Stauffenberg, you know, he complimented him on that. So I think, you know, that's kind of important. It's relevant. Cruise's performance. Cruise is a good actor, you know. Say what you may about his craziness or not, but he is a good actor. Other movies. In that movie, you know, it's again that individual, the Hitler. Here's an interesting thing. One of the reasons why the plot went the way that it did was those who were plotting it recognized that it could not just be an assassination of Hitler. There were other people that would fill the vacuum if he were to die, and so it was very imperative to them to take out his right hands, you know, his right hand, left hand, and those people that would fill that vacuum in case of an immediate emergency. And so trying to get all these people together at once to attempt an assassination, not just on Hitler, but these other very important people, was very difficult. And is one reason why the military coup, they had several attempts before the actual attempt in July. I believe it was on the 22nd. And it's a fascinating story. I would recommend reading An Honorable Defeat. It's a very thick book. It is very dry, but it's also really good about focusing not just on the military coup, but on different civilian resistance, and not just assassination attempts on Hitler. And that's one thing that I really liked about that book, is it focused on different forms of rebellion against Nazism. People who put their lives on the line to stand up against Nazism. I mean, this was the power that be. As Christians, this is something that we do need to think about and consider very prayerfully, the commands to submit ourselves to the authority as taught in Romans 13, but also recognizing the time and place and reasons and methods for saying no. I mean, Nazi Germany was a Christian nation, and look what happened there. They were very Christian. They had Catholics, they had Lutherans, they had various other denominations, but particularly Lutherans being the state church, but Catholicism is still very strong there. Stauffenberg was a very dedicated Catholic. Many of the people involved in the coup, the Valkyrie plot, were Catholic or various other Christian religions. But many of the Nazis themselves were also Catholic. There was definitely cult influences there as well, there was a mixture. There was people, you know, politics is politics. There are people that will call themselves Christian and then mock God, and they use Christianity and the fact that their nation claims to be Christian as a means to an end. It's propaganda. It's something that they can use. It's a tool. It's not really their faith. It's a language, it's a culture, it's images, it's symbolism that can be used to help shape people's minds and direct them into following a certain path. It's not sincere, and we see that here in the US. We see all that in Germany. There's a book I reviewed, The Broken Cross, or maybe it was Hitler's cross, but it compared the swastika, which is a cross that the ends are kind of bent. And the author is constantly referring to that to like a crooked cross. Anyway, I reviewed that book. I think that was the second book review I did. And it's a fair book. I disagree on a lot of doctrinal points on it, but nevertheless, he had a lot of good points in that book. And it's just a wake-up call kind of thing of, this is the propaganda that Hitler in particular used, the Nazis used, and they manipulated the language of Christianity and the fact that they were a Christian nation into pushing their own agenda. And I think, you know, just an observational point, Hitler and I'm sorry, I don't remember all the other different players' names. I really should, and I don't off the top of my head. They were so proud because they were going to create, they had a 1,000-year plan. And they were going to dominate and restore certain aspects of the great Roman Empire. And they had a 1,000-year plan. And whenever I hear about that, and I would read about their 1,000-year plan, and they would mock other nations for having like this image for 100 years, like 100 years nothing, we have a 1,000-year plan. And it makes me think of the millennial kingdom. I mean, I feel like this was a mankind, Satan's twisted image and perversion of what will be Jesus, you know, reign, his millennial reign, when there will be peace, you know. And it's not about a perfect ethnic group ruling, but Jesus Christ, the Son of God himself, is going to rule with his chosen people, the saints, you know, whether they're Jewish, Greek, you know, in this life they're bond-free, man or woman, you know, his people are going to go with him during his millennial reign. And the 1,000-year plan to me, and what I understand of it, is it seems like a deliberate satanic perversion of what the scriptures teaches in Revelations and in other the prophecies regarding the millennial reign. And that gets really off topic on the idea of sacrifice, but I don't know, it's like that the idea of a hero, von Stauffenberg and many of the others involved in that plot. Let me think if I can remember how to pronounce his name. Von Tresco? I think that was his name. He was head of Army A, I believe it was, and he committed suicide. And you think, is suicide, is that a noble sacrifice or not? And that's another topic that, like, I really wanted to talk more when it comes to movies and sacrifices, is movies that really commits suicide, is that truly noble? Is that, that's not something we want to promote, taking one's own life. I think there's a huge difference between the example of Steve Rogers jumping on the grenade in Captain America, yes, risking his life to save others, versus someone who deliberately pulls the trigger or deliberately commits suicide, even if they had noble means. And Tresco, keep in mind, this is real life. He was a person that he committed suicide. He wasn't captured with the others, but he was on the Eastern Front. That he had been part of. I mean, he'd really done a lot of work in recruiting a lot of officers into this plot, into this circle, this resistance. And so when it failed, because of his role, because he knew so many names, for the sake of his family, perhaps, and their safety, because there was, the idea of retribution against family members of people involved in these plots, then he committed suicide. And his role may not have ever been revealed had he not committed suicide, which is one of those weird things. But of course, in his position, he didn't know that. He didn't know who had been caught, and it's just, and you might wonder, what really went through his mind when he did that. And he was I believe he was a devout Catholic. And Catholics teach that suicide is like an unpardonable sin. And we've touched on this before in the newsletter and different articles, and I don't know if I think we mentioned this in a podcast or two. Suicide is a sin because you're taking your own life, and instead of trusting in God and allowing God to allow what happens, and just trusting your life in His hands, I think that's why it's a sin. But it's not unpardonable. I do believe I've known people who were genuinely saved, and once you're saved, your salvation isn't going to be taken away from you, who committed suicide. And this is a heavy topic. But when we're talking about sacrifices, I think sometimes they do get intertwined in Hollywood. And I think that's a very dangerous message when you convolute and mix the idea of a noble sacrifice and suicide together. No doubt Jesus knew exactly what was happening when he went to trial and everything that was going to happen. So allowing himself to be arrested was not suicide. I don't know, there's just, wow, I didn't even plan on talking about this necessarily, but it does actually touch into another movie I wanted to talk about, and I'm amazed I got off on Valkyrie, and that wasn't even originally one of the ones I was going to talk about, but I do like that movie, and I do find that piece of history so rich and fascinating, tragic, very tragic, and it is one of those things that I can only study in small doses, because like we said, we want to talk about what's just and true and pure, and sometimes when you get into heavy subjects like that, it's hard to find the justice and the pure things in those. So stick around. I'm going to do one more bonus. I don't know if it's going to be a half hour long or just a few minutes, but stick around for that, okay?